Hello and welcome to evolution. Let's jump right in and take a look. Evolution refers to the diversity of life. Evolution is change. Okay, so let's take a look at Lamarck. Lamarck's theory of evolution, Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, back in 1809, was one of the first scientists to understand that change occurs over time. It doesn't happen instantly. And he stated that changes are adaptations to the environment acquired in an organism's lifetime. And he said that those acquired changes were passed to offspring. Do you think he was right? Well, let's take a look. Okay, so according to Lamarck, we have the an original giraffe with a short neck. And because it needs to reach up to these to get more and more leaves, the neck would just continue to stretch and stretch and stretch until finally we have the giraffes that we have now with these long necks. So what Lamarck was saying is that the change is driven by some sort of inner need. And he said that these changes would pass along to the offspring. So these offspring would have longer necks than these offspring. All right. So what he's again saying that the traits acquired during a person's lifetime would be passed to the offspring. Now, the reason why this picture's here is this is a Doberman Pinscher puppy, and you can see it's got regular ears, but then these ears are cropped and the tail is cropped. And so, according to Lamarck's theory, then this Doberman, when it has puppies, it would have cropped ears and a cropped tail. All right. And so you could have someone like this with a grotesquely muscular body, and that means that that trait would be passed on along. Or beauty. All right, this is the same woman, and so by putting makeup on and doing her hair, that would get passed along to her children instead of how all the rest of us look. All right, now obviously that's not the case. And so we'll discuss how those changes get passed along and what changes. There are definitely changes that get passed along. Okay, so let's look at Charles Darwin and this voyage of the Beagle. So Charles Darwin was born in 1809, very close to my birthday. And what he did is he joined the crew of the HMS Beagle. I'd be interested to have you tell me what HMS stands for. So he joined the crew. He was 22 years old, not an old guy at this point. Joins the crew, sails around. He was a naturalist, and he sails around for 5 years around the world with this crew. So here is his journey. He left in 1839, and you can see he left. He went around South America and over here, sailed around there, came back, went around Australia, and then back on up to Europe. So he just went all over. He literally sailed around the world 5 years later. Okay, so the Galapagos Islands are where he's did a huge amount of research there, and it's a small group of islands west of South America. They have very different climates than where he was at in Europe. And the animals on the island were very unique, he noticed. The tortoises, the iguanas, the finches. And he started making these observations about the animals. All right, so again, here's the Galapagos Islands. Here they are right here, and they are off the coast of South America. Now, what he found is that these island species varied from the mainland species and then even from island to island. So a finch on Santiago would look different than on Santa Cruz, and definitely different than the mainland. So each island had long or short-necked tortoises. So you can see here, on the Pinta Island had this intermediate shell, and the Isabella Island had a dome-shaped shell, and Hood Island has this saddleback where it looks more like a saddle, and look how long that neck is for that tortoise. And he also noticed a difference there with the finches, which we've already looked at, but The finches on the island resembled a mainland finch, but they had different beaks based on the type of food they ate. So here you have all these, you have this is a vegetarian tree finch, and it mainly eats fruit. Well, you can see that ripping kind of beak here that has to rip open the outer covering of the fruit. And then this one to eat insects, more insects here. This one's got to go in the cactuses, seeds, and then this one's going to eat very big seeds because it's got a crushing beak. Okay, so here's what the observations that Darwin made is the patterns of diversity were shown, the diversity from the mainland to the islands and different things like that. And what he found is that there were unique adaptations in organisms, and these species were not evenly distributed. All right, so he also noticed that both the living organisms and fossils were collected. The fossils included trilobites and the giant ground sloth of South America. Now, as we've talked about before, with these changes in these differences in the beaks and and the differences from the islands, from the mainland, it's not that a finch that was on, let's go back here. It's not that a finch from one island, like suddenly this finch, how it changed from this one is it just grew this big fat beak so that it could survive. It didn't do that. It's just that if there happened to be a finch that had this big fat beak and it could find food because of it, that's the only one that survived to reproduce. This one didn't. And so that's how the genetic information is passing along. That finch itself is not changing. Okay, so the trilobites no longer exist, and we have to ask ourselves, well, what happened to them? All right, so we can look in the fossil record, and that gives us a picture, a snapshot of things that lived at different times. You have these layers in the sedimentary rock. That's why it's called sedimentary, because it's sediment. It's depositing things. And so you're going to have, obviously, the oldest things. It would make sense, because if we take the oldest things, put them at the bottom, and then more things are going to deposit on top, and then on another layer, and on another layer. So it just continues. So these we would expect to be the most recent organisms, and these to be the oldest. Now this one right here says the fossilized sea urchin at least 65 million years old. Of course, we don't have an actual method that could realistically date 65 million years old. Our dating methods really are only accurate up to about 5,000 years. And then beyond that, scientists just take that information and extrapolate it out. And so some scientists will say that this is 65 million years old, but there's really not an accurate test that we can run to say that it is 65 million years old. But what we do know is that it's probably obviously found in one of these lower layers of the sediment. All right, so the definition of evolution is this slow, gradual time. And why is it slow? Well, again, you've got to survive to reproduce. So if this is the one that survives to reproduce, then it's going to take some time. Because each species, it may take them 10, 15 years to get to the point of reproducing. All right, so like we've talked about before, if left unchecked without any limiting factors, the number of that species is going to grow exponentially. Well, we know realistically there are limiting factors. So that population, once it finds its optimal resources, that population is going to remain stable in its size. And again, if the resources are limited. All right, so here's what Darwin concluded. The first one, you need to know all of these. The first one is the production of more individuals can be supported by the environment leads to a struggle for existence among individuals. It's going to lead to competition. When you have more individuals, then you have resources. It only makes sense. If I have two pieces of candy left in the classroom, there's going to be a struggle. There's going to be a competition for the candy that's left. All right. Only a fraction of offspring survive each generation. Not everything survives, and the less parental involvement, the more babies that are, the more offspring that are produced, because the less they're going to survive. So you could have an octopus that will make hundreds of thousands of of babies, but very few will survive. And then, of course, we know survival of the fittest. Fit being survive to reproduce. So survival of the fittest, the one that is best suited for its environment is going to survive. And when it survives, it's going to reproduce, and its genetic information is going to get passed on along. If you don't survive to reproduce, your genetic information does not get passed along. All right, Darwin's observations: individuals of a population vary extensively in their characteristics, with no two individuals being exactly alike. So you're going to have this variation within the population, and much of that is inheritable. Unlike Lamarck's theory that it is heritable, if there's some sort of change that happens within a species lifetime, if I work out all the time and I get really muscle bound, my kids, that's not going to happen to them. Or if I change my hair color and I dye it red, that doesn't mean my children are now going to have red hair. Okay. Individuals who inherit their characteristics that are most fit for the environment are likely to leave more offspring than less fit. This is just kind of common sense stuff when you think about it. If you're more fit for an environment, again, it means you're going to survive to reproduce. Think of the peppered moth. And this is what we call natural selection. All right. So this whole concept, the unequal ability of individuals to survive to reproduce, leads to these gradual changes. Now, this says new species evolves. Keep in mind, we're still talking about finches. We're not talking about a finch turns into an alligator or anything. We're talking about a different species because it is now eating something different. So if suddenly now this is the one that survives to reproduce, well, the warbler finch, if that's going to survive to reproduce, then that's what's going to pass along the genetic information. All right, common descent with modification. If we look at this picture right here, we're looking at different ways that you can have change. You can start with an original species and then have this punctuated equilibrium. So these points where you can actually see where there were changes along the way that were passed along. Or you can have this gradualism. So there's this something, and then there'd be a gradual change here, and something here, and eventually here. Again, look, we're still looking at finch to finch. We're not changing into anything else. All right. Now, natural selection, again, now here's a picture of this insecticide application. So we have these insects that have been sprayed for, and so once they're sprayed here, they die, except for this one survivor. So this one in particular has some sort of chromosome with a gene that is resistant to that insecticide. Well, hello, look at this. Who do you think is surviving to reproduce? This one right here. So each of its offspring are all going to have that gene because it's the one that survived to reproduce, so it's going to pass along its genetic information. All right. We know that the struggle for existence is competition, survival of the fittest, the one that survives. We're not talking, when we say the strongest here, we're not talking about the strongest physically. We're talking about the one that's most fit for that environment to survive and reproduce. And descent with modification, a new species arises from a common ancestor that replaces a less fit species. All right, we know fitness is to survive and reproduce. Adaptations can be physical or they can be behavioral. So you can look at the physical, speed, camouflage, claws, quills, or behavioral, that they travel in herds or that they're all by themselves. And Obviously, if you have low fitness, you die. You produce few offspring. I don't think we need to look at that. Some believe the Earth is billions of years old, and again, we looked at the fossil record there and the geographic distribution. So let's chat about this a little bit in class. We'll look at Pangea, and we'll leave it there for today. Have a great day.